The letter was already halfway through when Clara Ashworth understood what was being done to her. She had heard her name twice before she realized Langdon was reading aloud. The chandeliers of the Lord Mayor's ballroom threw their light across 200 faces, and every face had turned. Somewhere near the far door, in the shadow of the entrance arch, stood a man she did not recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, plainly dressed for this company, a stranger who had arrived from Westerham Hall's London connection. Someone said, though Clara had not been listening to anyone's arrivals that evening. She did not listen to arrivals. She catalogued exits. Langdon's voice carried well. He had a voice built for carrying, smooth, parliamentary, the kind of voice that convinced drawing rooms it was reasonable while it was being cruel. He held the letter at a reading height. His posture relaxed, and he read the words that accused Clara of improper intimacy with her father's steward. The room went completely quiet. Clara stood still. She stood the way she had taught herself to stand through 7 years of learning that stillness was the only shield that did not break. Her hands were at her sides, not clasped, not fisted. Her chin was level. She did not lower her eyes. She did not weep. She did not allow a single visible tremor, because Rupert Langdon had timed this perfectly. Timed it for 200 witnesses, for the Lord Mayor's annual charity gala, for the one evening in the social calendar where the largest possible audience could watch her ruined in a single reading. And if she gave him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart, she would never recover. So she stood still. The letter reached its conclusion. Langdon lowered the paper, and his eyes did not meet hers. He had not looked at her once during the reading. That was the moment she understood the full shape of what he had done. He had not looked at her because she was no longer his problem. She was the floor's problem, the evening's problem, society's problem to manage. He had read the letter, and now he was free, and she was not a person who had been wronged. She was a situation. Humiliation poured through her, hot and total, and she did not let it show. If you are new to this channel, welcome. You have arrived at the right moment. Subscribe now, hit the bell so you never miss a story, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. This one is going to make you feel every single thing. The stranger near the door set his glass down on the orchestra table. He did not hand it to anyone. He did not look for a footman. He simply set it down, and then he began to walk, and the distance he walked was the full length of the ballroom floor. Clara watched him come. She watched because there was nothing else to do, and because she had decided in the first few seconds of Langdon's reading that she would look at whatever there was to look at rather than look at the floor. The floor held nothing useful. The stranger held at minimum interest. He was not a young man. He was perhaps 34, with dark hair and gray at the temples, and gray eyes the color of weather coming in from the sea. He moved through 200 people as if they were furniture arranged around him, and nobody stopped him, and nobody spoke, and Clara thought distantly that a man who could do that in a room full of people who valued only social consequence was either very dangerous or very indifferent to consequence, and at this particular moment she was not sure there was a difference. He reached Langdon. He held out one hand, open, palm up. Langdon looked at that hand for 2 seconds and then, without any visible alternative presenting itself, placed the letter in it. The stranger folded the paper once, then again. Then he tore it in half, and then in half again, and he let the pieces fall to the polished ballroom floor. They scattered at Langdon's feet. Langdon watched them fall and did not move. In the doorway, a younger man, dark coat, watchful eyes, stood very still and looked at his employer's hands and went pale. The stranger turned to Clara. He offered his arm. No introduction, no explanation, no request for her permission or her gratitude or her assessment of the situation. He simply offered his arm with the same quality of calm with which he had set down his glass. And Clara looked at it for exactly no hesitation at all and placed her hand on his sleeve. The room exhaled. The whisper that broke the silence moved through the gala like a tide coming in, and Clara heard none of the words because she was already walking, and the polished floor moved beneath her feet, and Rupert Langdon stood behind her with pieces of forged paper scattered at his shoes, and the stranger beside her did not look back once. His carriage was already waiting. Clara did not ask how he had known to have it ready. She stepped in without assistance and arranged herself in the corner with her hands in her lap, and the door closed, and the noise of the gala disappeared behind them. "Your name," she said, when the carriage had moved half a street's length. He looked at her from the opposite corner. "Edmund," he said, "Duke of Westerham." Clara considered that for a moment. A duke. Westerham Hall, she understood now, was not a London address, but a ducal seat, and the man opposite her had just destroyed a letter and a betrothal in front of 200 witnesses while wearing a coat that needed pressing. "I want to be direct with you," she said. "You appear to be," he said. "You don't own anything from this evening. I didn't ask you to intervene, and I'm not going to conduct myself as though I'm in your debt. If that is your expectation, say so now, and I will manage the remainder of the evening myself." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. The lamplight moved across his face, and then away. "That is not my expectation," he said. "Good," Clara said. The carriage moved through the dark streets of London, and neither of them spoke again, and the silence between them was not comfortable and was not uncomfortable. It was something else, something more like two people who had each been alone for a very long time, sitting in the same small space and discovering with some surprise that the other one did not feel like an intrusion. The carriage stopped in front of a lit townhouse. Clara could see candles in the upper windows. A woman's voice, somewhere inside, reached through the night air with something that sounded very much like instructions. She had no idea, as she set her foot on the carriage step, what the man watching from inside the carriage would cost her. She suspected, with the part of her mind that catalogued facts rather than feelings, that it would not be nothing. It was not nothing. Clara had not slept. She lay on the unfamiliar bed in Lady Honoria's guest room, with the curtains drawn and the ceiling overhead, and she thought about her mother, which she rarely did because her mother had died when Clara was 3 years old, and there was nothing useful to think about a person who had been gone that long. She thought about her instead because the alternative was thinking about the evening just ended, and she had catalogued everything about the evening just ended with complete precision and did not need to revisit the catalogue. Her mother's absence was the clean wound. Everything that came after it was the complicated one. She had been 8 years old when her father married again. She had been a quiet child, and the new Lady Ashworth was not a quiet woman, and the 8 years that followed had a particular texture that Clara had learned before she was old enough to fully understand what she was doing, to simply not examine. The woman was dead now. She had died when Clara was 16, and the house had gone very quiet, and Lord Ashworth had taken himself to his club for most of the following 7 years, and left Clara with the library and the household accounts, and Nell, who had been hired as a lady's maid when Clara turned 17, and had been, in some practical sense, Clara's only consistent company since. 7 years in the library. 7 years of her father's books on estate management, land valuation, import ledgers, and household accounts. Not because anyone thought she should read them, but because they were there and she was there, and silence was easier to bear when it had a structure inside it. The engagement to Sir Rupert Langdon had been arranged 18 months ago when Lord Ashworth's solicitor had a conversation with Langdon's solicitor about 2 outstanding debts that could be cleared through a marriage settlement. Clara had been informed by letter. She had met Langdon 4 times before the betrothal was formalized. She had known from the second meeting what kind of man he was. She had not said so because there was nothing useful to say. "You were awake when I came in," Nell said from the chair by the window. "I was awake when you left," Clara said. Nell's face said several things without saying any of them aloud. Lord Ashworth received Clara in his study the morning after the gala with the expression of a man who has received an invoice he did not expect. "The whole thing is deeply inconvenient," he said. He was not speaking to Clara. He was speaking to the middle distance above his desk. Clara sat in the chair across from him with her hands in her lap and waited. Langdon is finished, obviously. Whatever he thought he was doing with that letter, he has made himself unusable, which means the arrangement is dissolved without benefit to anyone. He picked up his pen, set it down. "I shall have to start again. There will be someone, a quiet country situation, a widower perhaps. You are 23, which is manageable." Clara looked at her father. He was 61 years old, and he had her mother's eyes, and he was talking about her future the way a man talks about livestock that has missed the market day and must be held over for next week's sale. "I understand," she said. She did understand. She had understood for years. She simply preferred to understand it clearly rather than pretend it was something else. "The Duke of Westerham's involvement is awkward," Lord Ashworth continued. "I don't know what the man thought he was doing. He has created a situation." "He helped me leave," Clara said. "He made a spectacle," Lord Ashworth said. "It will be talked about." Clara did not argue. She looked out of the window at the gray London morning and thought, with the part of her mind that catalogued facts, that being talked about was presumably better than being dissolved on the ballroom floor without anyone saying a word. She did not say this either. The morning did not improve. A call that would have been routine the week before, Lady Carruthers and her daughter, whose visits had been on the decline since the engagement was announced but had not yet stopped entirely, was turned away at the front door. Clara watched from the upstairs window as the carriage moved off without stopping. Lady Carruthers did not look up. The daughter did not look up. The morning moved on. The engagement had been Clara's one social anchor. Without it, she was the Earl's youngest daughter, plain, quiet, past the ideal age, without a match. And now she was also publicly associated with a forged letter and a dissolved betrothal, and the Duke of Westerham crossing a ballroom floor at full length. None of these things helped. Clara went to the household accounts because they needed doing, and because nobody else would do them, and because the silence of numbers was a relief after the noise of her father's voice. The Ashworth house accounts were maintained in 3 ledgers: household expenditure, staff wages, and kitchen provisioning. They were, in Clara's private assessment, a small disaster. Not a catastrophic one, the figures were recorded with reasonable consistency, but a disaster of oversight, which was a different and more treatable kind. She sat at the deal table in the small office off the kitchen corridor and opened the household expenditure ledger to the current quarter. She ran her finger down the column of figures. There it was. The candle supplier had invoiced twice for the same delivery in March, 11 shillings and 6pence charged in error. The wine merchant had adjusted his price in February without note, and the new price had simply been paid without query 3 times in a row, adding 14 shillings over the quarter. The linen service had been paying themselves from the household account rather than billing correctly. 41 shillings. Not nothing in a household that watched expenses. She corrected the entries in precise small handwriting. She drafted a note to the candle supplier requesting correction. She noted the wine merchant for later discussion. "I have never seen anyone else sit with those books," Nell said from the doorway. She was carrying a cup of tea. "Not in 3 years." "They needed doing," Clara said. "Yes." Nell set the tea down. "They also needed doing in April and in January. You did them those times as well." "Someone has to," Clara said. Nell's face arranged itself into an expression that was not quite saying, "You know, this is remarkable," and Clara poured her tea and turned the page, and the morning moved around her the way mornings did, loud on the outside and very quiet where she sat. The betrothal dinner had been at Ashworth House 6 weeks before the gala. Clara had dressed carefully. She had worn the blue silk because it was the best thing she owned, and the occasion seemed to require her best, even if she had not chosen the occasion and was not precisely sure what she was celebrating. The engagement had been arranged without her being asked. The agreement had been signed without her being shown it. She was attending her own betrothal dinner as a guest of the 2 men who had arranged it. Langdon had arrived with a small party, his solicitor, a cousin, and, in the background near the drawing-room door, the younger man Clara had since identified as his valet. She had noticed the valet because he stood at an angle that suggested he was trying to hear rather than serve, and she had filed the observation and moved on. The dinner itself had proceeded with the smoothness of something very well practiced. Lord Ashworth had spoken to Langdon about the estate. Langdon had spoken to Lord Ashworth about the settlement terms. The wine had been adequate and the soup had been slightly cold. Clara had attended to her meal and waited for the moment when she would be addressed. It had come, eventually, the fish course. "I was speaking to the master of the Westerham fox hunt last week," Clara said, choosing a subject that any country gentleman would find reasonable. She had looked at Langdon directly. "I understand the membership has changed." Langdon had turned to Lord Ashworth. "The Westerham hunt had an excellent season, I believe," he said pleasantly. The table had gone quiet for a moment. Clara put down her fork. "Sir Rupert," she said. Langdon continued talking to Lord Ashworth. She had picked up her fork again. There was nothing else to do. She had understood, with the precision that was her particular survival tool, that Langdon had not made a social error. He had made a statement. She was the object of the arrangement, not a participant in it. He had no need to speak to the object. She had thought, at the time, that this was the worst thing Langdon would do to her. She had been wrong, obviously. The valet, his name was Hartley, she later learned, had stood near the drawing-room door throughout the evening with an expression she could not quite read. At the gala, 6 weeks later, that same man had stood in the doorway of the ballroom and watched his employer read the letter with the expression of someone who has seen an accident happen that he was too late to stop. She had noticed. She had filed it. She did not yet know what to do with it. The 3 things happened in the order that they had to happen. First, Lord Ashworth sent a note to Lady Honoria's townhouse indicating that he had identified a suitable widower in Gloucestershire and would inform Clara of the particulars when the initial correspondence was complete. The note was addressed to Lady Honoria and made no reference to whether Clara's preferences on the matter would be consulted. Second, the morning call was turned away. A second caller that afternoon, A young woman Clara had known since they were girls, who had never been a close friend, but had been a reliable one, left a card without asking to be admitted. The card said she was very sorry for Clara's circumstances and did not suggest a further meeting. Third, Clara looked at the total column at the bottom of the household expenditure ledger and then looked up at the wall and understood with complete clarity that she had approximately 4 shillings and 6pence in her own possession, all of it borrowed from Nell over the previous 6 months and not yet repaid, and that there was not a penny in the world that she could call her own without her father's knowledge or consent. There was a cage. She had always known about it. She had simply never stood in the exact center of it and looked outward before. The stranger's arm had been the first exit she had seen in 7 years. Lady Honoria's drawing-room door opened. The older woman stood in the doorway with an expression that Clara could not immediately categorize. Not pity, not judgment, something more like a person who has watched a game being played for a long time and has finally arrived at the move she was waiting for. "Come in," Lady Honoria said. "We have a great deal to discuss, and I find standing in corridors deeply inefficient." Clara went in. The door of Lady Honoria's drawing-room closed behind her, and the London afternoon continued outside, and the cage, for the first time in years, had a door in it that was not locked. Lady Honoria's drawing-room was the warmest room Clara had been in since the gala. The fire was well built, the furniture was good without announcing itself as good. The morning light came through tall windows without apology, and the room smelled of the previous evening's candles and this morning's coffee, and there was something about all of it that Clara found entirely disorienting after 3 years of Ashworth House's managed chill. Lady Honoria stood at the mantelpiece, Edmund sat in a chair near the window, and Clara sat across from him, and the 3 of them arranged themselves in the geography of a conversation that none of them had precisely agreed to have. "I will leave you two to discuss the practical matters," Lady Honoria said. She said this in the voice of a woman who has engineered the departure she is about to make. She collected her embroidery from the small table without looking at either of them. "I find practical matters deeply tedious. You will manage without me." She went out. The door closed. Clara looked at Edmund. He was looking at the window. He turned when the door clicked shut and found her looking at him, and he did not seem particularly troubled by this. He had, she noticed, the quality of a man who is accustomed to being looked at and has long stopped finding it interesting. "You noticed she arranged that," Clara said. "She arranges most things," Edmund said. "Yes," Clara said. "I noticed." She filed this fact in the same place she was filing all the other facts about this situation, which was a location in her mind she might describe as not yet useful, but possibly important later. Edmund addressed the situation with the same quality of attention he had given the Gala ballroom, complete and entirely impersonal. "The special license is the most practical arrangement," he said. "It provides you with legal protection that your father's authority cannot reach. Your status and residence are secured. The household at Westerham Hall is under your authority for domestic purposes from the date the arrangement is formalized." He paused, not for effect, but because the list appeared to be complete. "These are the material terms." Clara listened to the material terms. "You are offering me a marriage of convenience," she said when he had finished. "I am offering you a protected position and a legal status that cannot be revoked by your father," Edmund said. "What you term it is your business." "I am asking because the distinction matters to me," Clara said. "Not to you, evidently." Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but something that registered her as a more complicated category than he had been working with. "The distinction is accurate," he said. "It is a marriage of convenience. I am offering it because you were wronged in public, and I happen to have the means to address that, and because my aunt considers it an excellent idea, and I have found, over 34 years, that my aunt's excellent ideas tend to resolve correctly." A pause. "That is the full accounting. What do you want from it?" Clara asked. The pause this time was fractionally longer. "Nothing you have not agreed to give," he said. Clara considered this. It was, she thought, perhaps the most honest thing a man had said to her in some time. She asked the one practical question she needed answered. "Will I have access to the Westerham Hall household accounts?" The slight adjustment in Edmund's expression suggested this was not the question he had expected. "Yes," he said. "Then I accept," Clara said. Lord Ashworth arrived on the third day, as Clara had known he would. She heard his voice in the hall, the particular authoritative register he used with other people's servants, the one that expected to be obeyed as a matter of course, and she set down the book she was not reading and waited. Edmund was at the writing desk in the corner of the drawing room. He had been there since breakfast, working through something that required his concentrated attention and generated almost no noise. He looked up when Lord Ashworth's voice reached the room. Lord Ashworth appeared in the doorway without waiting to be announced. He had apparently decided that normal domestic procedure did not apply to a father collecting his daughter. "Clara," he said, "you will return with me this morning." Clara did not move. Edmund set down his pen. He rose from the desk with the unhurried quality of a man who has decided what he is going to do and has no need to hurry it. He crossed the room and stepped into the entrance hall, placing himself between Lord Ashworth and the drawing-room door. He did not raise his voice. He did not adjust his posture. "Lady Ashworth is under this house's protection," he said, "and under mine. These are her legal and residential terms as of 2 days ago. If you have a concern you wish to address, Mr. Pemberton on Chancery Lane holds the relevant documents." Lord Ashworth's face went through several expressions rapidly. "This is a family matter," he said. "It was," Edmund said. "It is not now." The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Lord Ashworth turned, and his footsteps crossed the hall, and the front door was opened by a footman and closed behind him, and Lord Ashworth was gone. Edmund returned to the drawing-room. He sat down at the desk. He picked up his pen. Clara watched all of this from where she had not moved. In the hall doorway, Lady Honoria appeared. She looked at Edmund's back at the writing desk. She looked at Clara. Her expression said, with considerable eloquence, exactly what she was thinking, and none of it was a surprise. Then she walked past the doorway and continued down the hall, and the sound of her satisfied footsteps was the most expressive thing in the room. The fire had burned down to a comfortable glow. Lady Honoria was reading. Edmund stood at the window with a glass of port he had not touched. Clara sat in the armchair nearest the fire with a book she was actually reading this time, because the warmth and the quiet had made reading possible in a way it had not been for some days. The footman came to make up the fire and found, when he arrived with the coal scuttle, that the task was already done. Edmund had crossed to the fireplace at some point while Clara was reading and had adjusted the grate himself, a quick and practical rearrangement of the coals that needed doing, and had returned to the window without mentioning it. The footman looked at the fire, and then at the coal scuttle, and then at the floor. "Thank you, William," Lady Honoria said, without looking up from her book. "You may go." William went. His retreat was the retreat of a man who has understood that the social landscape has shifted and is not sure in which direction. Clara had watched Edmund's hands at the grate. She had noted the act, the speed of it, the absence of commentary, the simple fact that something needed doing, and he had done it and filed it in the same location as all the other facts about this man that did not quite fit the picture he presented of himself. "My nephew," Lady Honoria said, turning a page, "has never in his life been able to watch something need doing and refrain from doing it. It is his most inconvenient quality and also his best one." She did not look up. She continued reading. Edmund, at the window, said nothing. Clara thought about this for a moment and then returned to her book, and the fire burned warmly, and the evening settled around all three of them in a way that was almost, if you were not paying close attention, peaceful. The special license ceremony at Lady Honoria's drawing room lasted 12 minutes. The minister was efficient. Edmund was formal. Clara was precise. The ring, a plain gold band, not ostentatious, practical in the way that everything Edmund did was practical, was placed on her left hand with the same quality of directness with which Edmund did everything, and Clara noted the weight of it and did not examine what she felt about the weight of it, because examining what she felt was not a productive use of the morning. "Well," Lady Honoria said, when the minister had gone, "you have managed to get married in the most business-like manner I have witnessed in 65 years of attending these ceremonies, and I attended one in the rain at a coaching inn, so I speak with some authority." She looked at them both. "You will do." The trunks were already in the hall. Nell had packed with the thoroughness of a person who has long experience of being ready before anyone expects her to be. The Westerham Hall carriage, heavier than the Gala carriage, built for distance rather than town use, waited in the street outside. Clara stood in Lady Honoria's hall with the ring on her hand and looked at the carriage and understood, with the precision she applied to most things, that she was about to enter a house she had never seen, belonging to a man she had known for 10 days, and that this was the most open thing her life had been since she was 8 years old. Lady Honoria kissed her on the cheek. "He adjusts the fire," Lady Honoria said quietly. "He has always done it. Pay attention to what a man does, not what he says he is." Then she stepped back, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has just moved a chess piece she is very pleased with. The carriage moved, and the London streets fell away behind it, and the road opened ahead toward Westerham Hall, and Clara looked out of the window at the autumn morning and let herself, for the first time since the gala, stop cataloguing exits and simply sit inside the open door. She is married to a duke she barely knows. The ring is on her finger, and the road ahead leads to a house full of closed doors and unanswered questions. But there is something on Clara's wrists that no one has seen yet, a secret she has carried for 15 years. And Langdon is still in London and still dangerous. Stay with me. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now so you don't miss what comes next. Westerham Hall was exactly what Clara had expected, and nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected a duke's house to announce itself, to have the particular quality of weight that comes from centuries of consequence. Westerham Hall had that weight, but it wore it differently than she had anticipated. The library was 3 rooms deep and smelled of real use. The dining room was long and polished and caught the morning light at an angle that turned the floor gold for approximately 20 minutes before the sun moved on. The kitchen garden, visible from the east-facing windows of the breakfast room, was productive and well-ordered, and had the look of a place where someone cared about the outcome and not only the appearance. It was a house that worked. Clara had been managing houses since she was 17, with no authority and no acknowledgement, and she understood very quickly that Westerham Hall was managed by a steward who was good at his job, and by a duke who noticed when things did not work and corrected them without theatrics. She had met Mr. Carow on her second morning. He had the economy of a man who had found the right amount of words for every situation and used no more. "The East Wing receives guests when guests are expected," he said, showing her the household ledger for the first time. "His Grace's study is not part of the domestic household accounts. Those are kept separately." He paused. "You will find the kitchen provisioning ledger requires cross-referencing with the quartermaster's record. I can show you the system." "Please," Clara said. Mr. Caro's expression suggested this was a satisfactory response. The dining room had a discoloration on the north wall, she noticed, on the third morning. A slightly different shade of plaster where the light fell across it, a faint rectangular outline she might have missed if she had not, over many years, developed the habit of noticing the shapes of absences. "There was a portrait there," she said to Mr. Caro, who happened to be walking past. "Yes," Mr. Caro said. "Removed some years ago?" "Some years ago," Mr. Caro confirmed. His manner did not close the subject with hostility. It simply closed it, the way a well-fitted door closes, completely, without effort, without drama. Clara noted the absence. She noted that Edmund ate breakfast in the dining room every morning, directly below that absent space, and looked at his correspondence, and never looked at the wall. She was not expecting him at 10:30 in the evening. The library was hers, in the practical sense, for as many hours as she wanted it. Edmund used it in the mornings for correspondence. The evenings were Clara's by default. She had established this without anyone discussing it, simply by being there when he was not. And on this particular evening, she was at the desk with the Westerham Hall household expenditure ledger and the kitchen provisioning cross-reference and a specific discrepancy she was trying to trace. The door opened. Edmund stopped in the doorway. He had evidently not expected her either. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He came in anyway. He crossed to the bookshelf on the far wall with the manner of a man who has decided not to acknowledge that anything unusual is happening. And she returned to the ledger, and the library resumed its quiet around both of them. She found the discrepancy 8 minutes later. "The wine merchant changed his pricing system in the spring," she said, not particularly addressing the room, more thinking aloud in the way she did when the ledgers had her full attention. "He has been invoicing by the case since April instead of by the dozen. Mr. Caro hasn't adjusted the purchase order template. You've been overpaying by approximately 11 shillings every 2 weeks. She looked up. Edmund had turned from the bookshelf. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not cold, not warm, something more precise than either. He was paying attention, not the formal, comprehensive attention of a man who is managing a situation, but the other kind, the kind where a specific thing has caught and held. He came to the desk. He looked at the ledger page she was working from, and then at the second ledger she had open beside it, and then at the pencil notations she had made in the margin. The lamp threw warm light across the page. His hand rested on the edge of the desk, close to the book, not touching her hand. Close. "How long has this been occurring?" he asked. "Since April. Roughly 19 shillings, lost over the quarter." She looked at the page. "It is not a large amount, but errors accumulate." "How did you find it?" She looked up at him. His face was near enough that she could see the gray in his eyes had light moving through it when the lamp shifted. "I was cross-referencing," she said. "I cross-reference everything. It is how you see where the system has drifted." He was quiet for a moment. "You learned this from your father's library," he said. It was not quite a question. "From his books," she said. "He did not teach me." Edmund said nothing to that. He straightened. He took his book from the shelf where he had apparently gone to find it and had not yet opened. "I'll mention it to Caro in the morning," he said. "I've already drafted a note," Clara said. Another pause. Something almost adjacent to humor crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the shape that comes before. "Yes," he said. "I imagine you have." He went to the armchair by the fire and opened his book. They read in the same room for another 40 minutes, the lamp burning between them, and when Clara finally closed the ledger and gathered her notes and said good evening, he looked up and said good evening in return, and it was an entirely ordinary exchange that she thought about for some time afterward. In the morning, his manner was completely formal. She served herself from the breakfast things, and he read his correspondence, and nothing in the room acknowledged that the library had happened. She did not expect him to acknowledge it. She simply noted that he did not, and filed the observation with the others. 3 days after the library, Clara brought the quarterly account summary to Edmund's study, with the specific error annotated and the cumulative loss calculated. Edmund looked at the summary. He looked at the calculations. He set the paper down. "You have been doing this for 7 years," he said. "Since I was 17, Clara said, "at Ashworth House. No one asked me to. The books needed doing, and no one else was doing them. And no one noticed." "My father is not interested in household accounts," Clara said. "He does not read them. He receives the annual summary from his steward and moves on." Edmund looked at her for a moment with the expression she was beginning to associate with his recalibrations, the moment when he was revising a prior assessment and had not yet reached the next one. "The error saves Westerham Hall approximately 44 shillings a quarter," she said. "That is a relatively small amount." She paused. "But I also found something else while I was reviewing the land registry cross-references." She put down a second sheet. "Langdon's name appears in a land registry entry against a property in Sussex. I don't know what the connection means. I may be reading it wrong, but the dates are unusual. The entry is from approximately 3 months before the engagement was formalized." Edmund looked at the second sheet without touching it. "Where did you find this?" he said. "In the cross-reference index. Your library has a comprehensive property registration digest. I was using it to verify the Westerham Hall boundary survey, and I noticed the name." Edmund looked at the sheet for another moment. Then he called for Mr. Caro. Mr. Caro appeared in the doorway with the promptness of a man who has been in the vicinity for some time. "The Sussex Land Registry entry," Edmund said. He handed Mr. Caro the sheet. "I want the full record for that property. Sussex estate mortgage records specifically. Do it quietly and do not engage Langdon's solicitors." "Of course," Mr. Caro said. He took the sheet. His expression suggested this was a perfectly routine errand and that he had no questions. He went. Edmund returned his gaze to Clara. "You will tell me if you find anything else unusual," he said. "Yes," Clara said. She paused. "That is, if you want me to." "I want you to," Edmund said. It was said plainly, and she received it plainly, and they returned to their respective parts of the morning. "A letter came this morning," Nell said, "from a solicitor in London." Clara was at the window of her sitting room, looking at the kitchen garden. She turned. "Not from Lady Honoria," Nell added. "From a different firm." Mr. Caro received it, and his face did something I have not seen it do before. Clara waited. "His Grace read it in the study and then put it in the drawer," Nell said. "The left-hand drawer with the lock. He locked it." "You saw all of this," Clara said. "I was in the hall with the linen," Nell said. "The study door was open. I did not go looking." Clara looked at her hands. The ring on her left hand caught the afternoon light. "He is protecting me from it," she said. Not a question. I expect so, Nell said. Clara thought about this carefully, which was the only way she thought about things. The letter was from Langdon's solicitor. She was nearly certain of this, though she did not say so to Nell. The timing fit, the lock on the drawer fit, the expression on Mr. Caro's face fit. Edmund was managing the threat before she could see it, which was an act of protection and also, simultaneously, an act that put a wall between them at the exact moment when something had begun to feel like less of a wall. That evening at dinner, Edmund was entirely formal. The household topics were covered, the arrangements for the following week's provision order were discussed, and nothing in his manner or hers acknowledged either the library or the locked drawer. She watched him across the length of the table. He ate his soup and read a letter and looked up once, and when he found her looking at him, his gaze held for a moment before he looked away. She did not know what he was thinking. She rarely did. She was beginning to understand one of the essential facts about Edmund. He thought in a private register that he had not yet given anyone access to, and the cold mask was not cruelty but containment. It was not enough to tell her what he was containing. She had not been looking for the portrait room. She had been looking for the account books from the previous decade, which Mr. Caro had mentioned were kept in storage on the upper corridor. The door was slightly open. She pushed it and stopped. Edmund was standing in the middle of a room she had not known existed, between covered canvases on wooden frames, in front of one that was uncovered. The painting was of a woman, perhaps 50, perhaps 55, with dark hair and the particular kind of face that age has made more interesting rather than less. She wore gray, and she sat with the bearing of someone who had spent her life being looked at and had decided some time ago that she did not particularly mind. Her eyes were gray like Edmund's. Edmund stood in front of the portrait with his hands at his sides and his back to the door, and he was absolutely still. Clara had learned about stillness. She knew the different kinds of it. There was the stillness of endurance, the kind she had practiced for years in Ashworth House, the body held carefully against pressure, and there was this other kind, the stillness of a person standing in front of something they cannot change, and are not yet done grieving. She recognized it. She had felt it herself in the Ashworth House library, in front of a particular chair that had been her mother's. She did not step further into the room. She did not speak. She turned and went back down the corridor with the same quietness she had entered with, and she did not look for the previous decade's account books that afternoon, and she did not tell Nell what she had seen. She sat in her sitting room as the autumn light gave way to early dark, and she thought about gray eyes that were the same shade on a canvas and on a man, and about the particular weight of a grief that has not been named aloud to anyone. For the first time since the gala, she was not thinking about her own situation. She was thinking about his. She realized, with the precision of a woman who had learned to be honest with herself above all others, that she had something to lose. She had not expected that. He came to find her in the sitting room at the hour when the household settled into its evening rhythms. "There is something I do each year at this time," he said. "I would not object if you came." He said it the way he said most things, as a fact rather than a request, with the faint quality of a man who is not accustomed to asking and is not entirely sure this counts as asking. Clara set down her letter and rose without question. The Westerham chapel was at the west end of the house, through a door she had not yet opened. It was small and cold and plainly furnished. No ornate windows, no ceremonial display, just stone and wood and the particular hush of a space that has absorbed many years of private use. Edmund lit the candles on the altar himself, one by one, with the concentrated attention he gave to things that mattered to him, and the same absence of commentary he applied to everything else. There were 7 candles. He lit them all. Clara stood behind him and did not speak. She had learned, in the weeks at Westerham Hall, that Edmund's silences were not invitations to fill them, and that filling them was the wrong thing to do. She looked at the candles and the stone and the cross on the altar, simple and plain, and she thought about the portrait she had seen in the storage room and about gray eyes that were the same on a canvas and on a man. She thought she understood something about why he had brought her here. She reached past him for a prayer book on the small shelf beside the altar. It was the natural movement, the instinctive one when standing in a chapel, and her sleeve slipped. Edmund went still. She looked down. The inside of her left wrist was visible in the candlelight. The scars ran along the inner surface in pale, settled lines. Old damage, faded from age but not gone, the kind of marks that are made by rope on young skin and remain as a record. She had been 8 years old the first time. She had been 14 the last. She did not cover her wrist. She looked at the inside of her arm in the candlelight and let him look, because she was done with hiding it, and because something about this particular chapel, this particular man, this particular evening of candles, lit for a person he had not been able to bury, made the hiding feel wrong in a way it had not felt before. Edmund's gaze rested on her wrist. He did not speak. He did not look away. The candles burned. The chapel was very quiet. "A rope," she said. Her voice was completely level, tied to the bedpost of the room they put me in when I was being punished. My stepmother tied it. She called it teaching me to be still. Clara looked at the candles. I learned to be still. She died when I was 16. The instruction continued after she was gone, because by then I had learned to do it myself. Edmund said nothing. Ages 8 to 14 were the years she was most consistent about it, Clara said. After 14, she lost interest in the project. She was not a precise woman. She had a general tendency rather than a specific program. She paused. I am aware this is unusual information to give a person you have known for 3 weeks. Edmund was still standing beside her, and he still had not moved, and his silence was not the silence of a person who could not find words. It was the silence of a person who was choosing to receive what they were being given without deflecting it into speech. I never told anyone, she said. Nell was always outside the room. She heard things she was not supposed to hear. She could not have stopped it, and she knew it. I did not ask her to try. She looked at her wrist. I have not named this to a living person before tonight. The chapel smelled of tallow and cold stone, and the faint scent of the garden coming in under the door. The candles threw soft, moving light across the altar. I think, Clara said slowly, that the stillness at the gala, the reason I could stand there and not break, is that I had been practicing standing still in difficult situations since before I was old enough to understand what I was practicing for. She did not weep. She named the wound in the same observational register she used for household accounts, because that was the register she had for facts. And this was a fact, and she did not know how to give it a different register without losing it entirely. Edmund received it all. He did not offer comfort. He did not reach for her. He was simply there, in the same way the chapel walls were there, present and still, and not asking her to be other than she was. Shame poured through her. Not shame of the wound, but shame of the naming, the sudden awareness that she had given someone something she could not retrieve, and she breathed through it the way she breathed through everything until it passed. She did not ask him to respond. She had shown what she had shown, and she did not perform vulnerability or demand its echo. She simply let the disclosure settle into the chapel air and breathed and waited for nothing in particular. Edmund's choice, when it came, was entirely physical. He reached for her wrists. He took them gently, both of them together, and covered them with his hands. Both of his hands cupped around both of hers, so that the inside surfaces of her wrists were enclosed in warmth, not a grip, not a gesture designed for observation, simply the weight of his hands over the place where the damage was, the way you might cover something that has been left in the cold too long. He said nothing. Clara felt the warmth of his hands and the specific weight of them and the fact that they were there, and she felt something she had not felt since before she was 8 years old, which was the feeling of a person choosing to stand between her and the thing that had hurt her, not because she had asked them to, and not because it was their arrangement, but because they had decided to. Witness, she thought. This is what it feels like to be witnessed. She looked up at him. He was looking at her, not at her wrists, but at her face, with an expression that was not pity. She would have stepped back from pity, and was not sympathy in the soft social sense. It was something more direct than either. It was the expression of a person who has understood and stayed, and is not going to pretend the understanding is less than what it is. She held his gaze. She did not look away. He did not look away. The candles burned between them, and the chapel held them in its cold quiet, and neither of them moved, and it was the most intimate thing that had happened to Clara in as long as she could remember. Proximity ladder, rung 7, the highest she had allowed herself to stand. He walked her back to the house through the corridor without speaking. At the door of the main hall, he paused. "I am glad you came," he said. He said it in the same voice he used to confirm the week's provision order, matter of fact and complete, not embellished, not performed. True. She did not answer because there was nothing to say that was as true as what he had said, and she went upstairs with that simple sentence sitting in her chest like a small, warm weight. The next morning was formal. Edmund sat at the breakfast table and addressed the day's affairs with his usual economy. Clara sat across from him and did the same, and nothing in the surface of the morning acknowledged the chapel. But the surface was different. He sat closer than he had the week before, not dramatically closer, not a gesture designed for interpretation, but closer, in the way a person sits when they are no longer managing a careful distance from someone. When she reached for the coffee, he had already poured it. When she mentioned the quarterly provision order, he had already drafted the instruction for Caro. He was paying attention in a different way. Nell came in with the morning correspondence, and her gaze found Clara's face and stayed there for a moment, reading something in Clara's expression that the morning's formality was not quite hiding. Nell said nothing. She set the letters on the tray and went. She was very good at witnessing without editorializing. Clara ate her toast and looked at the faint rectangular discoloration on the north wall of the dining room and thought about the portrait that was not there, and about the portrait that was in storage, and about the man who lit 7 candles every year for a woman who had died without forgiving him. She thought, we are the same kind of damaged. She thought, I did not come to Westerham Hall expecting to find that. She thought, whatever this is, it is not the arrangement I agreed to in Lady Honoria's drawing room, and it is not the arrangement I agreed to in the carriage, and I do not know what it is yet, but I know it is real. Everything had changed. The chapel had changed it. There was no reversing the direction now. The scars have been seen. Edmund has stayed. But Langdon has not paid yet, and what is coming to Westerham Hall next will test everything they have just found. Carlton House is still ahead. If you haven't subscribed, do it now. You do not want to miss what happens next. The affidavit arrived on a Thursday. Mr. Carow brought it to the study at 9:30 in the morning, with the expression of a man who has been handed something unpleasant and is delivering it with maximum efficiency in order to be free of it as quickly as possible. He set it on the desk before Edmund and indicated with a brief nod that it had come via a solicitor's clerk from a firm in Gray's Inn Road. Edmund broke the seal and read. The document was 15 lines long and exceedingly precise. Langdon's solicitor had done him the service of being entirely clear. The affidavit claimed that Clara Ashworth had consented to dissolve the engagement first and privately, several days before the gala, and that Edmund's subsequent marriage to her had been conducted under false representations made to her father. It further suggested, and the word suggested was doing considerable legal work in the sentence, that Edmund's interest in Clara was primarily financial, given that the Ashworth earldom carried certain reversionary interests in a property dispute that Langdon's solicitor listed in an attached schedule. The schedule was 2 pages long. It was, Edmund thought, reading it carefully, creative. "The Sussex mortgage records," he said, without looking up. "Ready, Your Grace," Mr. Carow said. "As of yesterday, Lady Ashworth's observation was accurate. The encumbrance dates precede the engagement by 6 weeks. The estate was mortgaged before Sir Rupert's interest in the match was formalized." Edmund set the affidavit on the desk. "The Carlton House Ball," he said. "Lord Daventry's charity event," Mr. Carow said. "Next Thursday. Langdon is expected to attend. Miss Pemberton's family is also expected." Edmund looked at the affidavit one more time. "The Langdon solicitor's timing is impeccable," Mr. Carow said, in a voice that suggested impeccable was not a compliment. Edmund did not respond to this, which Mr. Carow appeared to find entirely satisfactory. He departed. Edmund sat with the 2 documents, the 15-line affidavit and the 2-page creative schedule, and the Sussex mortgage records with their dates, and he did not feel the fear Langdon had intended. He felt something colder and more specific than fear, which was the feeling of a man who has just been given sufficient reason to do what he was already inclined to do. He locked the affidavit in the study drawer. He did not yet go to find Clara. The cold mask came back all at once. Clara noticed it at breakfast the morning after Mr. Carow's visit to the study. Edmund was at the table before her, which was not unusual, but the quality of his attention was different. He addressed the day's domestic matters with his standard efficiency, and asked about the provision order with his standard precision, and nothing in his manner was wrong, and everything about the morning felt precisely as it had in the first days at Westerham Hall, before the library and before the chapel. Before, she ate her toast and answered his questions about the provision order and looked at the discoloration on the north wall and understood with the particular precision that was her most reliable attribute that something had changed. She simply did not know what. A letter came, Nell told her 2 days later, from a solicitor in London, not the same firm as before. She set the breakfast tray down. Mr. Carow's expression when he received it was different from the first time, more serious. Clara looked at her hands. "His Grace locked something in the study drawer," Nell said, "the one on the left. He does not usually lock that drawer." "Thank you," Clara said. She knew. She was almost entirely certain she knew. Langdon had escalated. She had expected the escalation. She had been waiting for it since the first solicitor's letter arrived. The form of the escalation she could guess at, the affidavit type. Claims that she was the one who had breached the engagement. Claims designed to reframe everything that had happened at the gala. She understood why Edmund had locked the drawer and not told her. She also understood that his silence and his returned formality were the same thing. Both acts of protection, both arriving at the same result, which was the feeling of standing on one side of the room with her husband on the other side, and a distance between them that had not been there the day after the chapel. The distance felt like loss. She had something to lose now, and she was losing it, and she did not know how to stop it without asking for something she had not been offered and might not be given. She endured 3 formal dinners. She returned to the household accounts with the thoroughness of a woman doing something useful while she waited to decide what to do. On the 3rd evening, she decided. She found him in the library at 10 o'clock with a glass of port he was not drinking and a letter he was not reading. "What has happened?" she said. She did not frame it as a question because she wanted a direct answer, and questions, she had found, gave people room to redirect. Edmund looked at her. He said nothing. "Something arrived from Langdon's solicitor," she said. "It has been 3 days. You have locked it in your drawer and you have not told me. I am asking you to tell me now." "It is a legal matter," Edmund said. "I am handling it." "I know you are handling it," Clara said. "I am not asking you to stop handling it. I am asking you why you have been 3 feet farther away from me every day for the past 3 days. A long pause. "There is a document," Edmund said. "Langdon's solicitor. It makes claims about you that are false. I am in the process of addressing them." He paused. "It is not something you need to carry." "It concerns me," Clara said. "It is about me. I am not a person who can be protected by being kept outside the room." Another pause. Then Edmund set down the port and the unread letter and looked at her with the expression she was coming to know, the one where he was revising something that was costing him something to revise. "No," he said, "you are not." The fire burned. The lamp threw steady light between them, and then, because she had confronted him and he had not retreated and the room had gone quiet in a way that felt like a held breath, she said, "What is the worst thing Langdon's document says?" Edmund said that the arrangement was your idea, that you ended the engagement and contrived the marriage, that I was deceived. Clara received this. "And that you are considering whether it is true," she said. "No," Edmund said, with more force than he had used in any conversation she had heard from him. "I am not." The force of it settled in the room. "Then tell me what is actually happening," she said. "Not the legal part, the other part." The silence that followed was long enough that she thought he would not answer. "My mother died in the winter of 1822, Edmund said. His voice changed registers, not dramatically, but distinctly, the way a door changes the quality of a room when it opens. "Her name was Lady Beatrice. I was in Constantinople. I was there because the position required it, and because I had stayed away from England for 6 years, and because she had not forgiven me, and I had not found a way to make her forgive me. So I stayed away instead of coming home." Clara sat very still. "She died in December," Edmund said. "I received the letter 6 weeks later. I was already too late. I came home and I removed her portrait from the dining room and put it in storage because I could not sit and look at her face and know that the last thing between us was an unanswered question." He looked at the fireplace. "Thomas died in 1816 in a riding accident. He was 21. He was riding a horse that should have been mine. I had refused the horse that morning because it was newly shod and I did not trust its footing. Thomas took it instead. He stopped. My mother knew I had refused the horse. She never said it directly. She did not need to. He said nothing for a moment. I do not know whether she would have relented, he said. That is the question I cannot answer. That is why the portrait is in storage, because I have not decided what to do with a question I cannot answer. Clara let the confession sit in the room without filling it immediately. She had learned from watching Edmund that silence was its own form of respect. My mother died when I was 3 years old, she said. I have no portrait of her. I never did. There is nothing in Ashworth House with her face in it except one miniature that my father keeps in a box in his desk and has never shown me directly. She looked at her hands. I have spent 30 years with a blank wall. Edmund went completely still. It was a different stillness from the formal kind. This was the stillness of a person who has just heard something that has reorganized what they thought they understood. You showed me what you carry, Clara said, in the chapel, and I did not retreat from it. I am asking you to extend me the same. She held his gaze. I am not leaving this arrangement, she said. I chose to stay when I could have left. I am telling you this because you appear to believe that the distance you created is protecting me, and I want you to understand that it is not. It is only making you very alone in a room I am also in. Edmund looked at her for a long time. I know, he said, 2 words, the same register as the chapel, quiet and complete, and utterly without qualification. She stayed. She did not move toward him, and she did not move away. She simply remained in the room, which was all he had done for her in the chapel, and it turned out that staying was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything either of them had needed someone to do for a very long time. Edmund called Mr. Carow into the study at 8 in the morning. The Carlton House ball, he said, next Thursday. Lady Ashworth and I will attend. Of course, Your Grace. The Sussex mortgage records. Have them bound and indexed by county record date, earliest to latest. I want the encumbrance date on the first page and the engagement formalization date on the second. Already done, Mr. Carow said, with the air of a man who anticipated this instruction the moment the affidavit had arrived. The original documents, or certified copies with the original seals, Your Grace. The originals remain with the county registry. Edmund looked at him. You did this yesterday. I did it the morning after Lady Ashworth identified the discrepancy, Mr. Carow said. I felt it advisable to be prepared. Edmund said nothing for a moment. Then, good. Clara stood at the study door, which she had not entered, but which was open. Edmund turned and looked at her. Carlton House, he said. Thursday. I know, she said. I heard. A pause. You will need to bring the mortgage records, she said, but I will be the one to present them. The analysis is mine. The presentation should be mine. Edmund looked at her for a moment with the recalibration expression. Yes, he said, it should. The carriage for Carlton House was ordered that afternoon. The battle at last was chosen. Carlton House had the quality of a building that knew it was being used for something important. The chandeliers were lit full, every arm, every drop of crystal, the kind of illumination that serves social theater rather than visibility. 200 guests circulated through the principal rooms. The Lord Mayor's charity ball had the particular energy of an event that believes itself to be about charity, while in fact being entirely about positioning, and this suited Edmund and Clara perfectly because it was exactly the kind of event where the positioning mattered. Edmund's effect on the room was immediate and involuntary. The conversations nearest to the door altered first. The particular social recalibration that happened when a man with sufficient consequence entered a gathering and the gathering adjusted around him the way water adjusts around a stone. Clara felt it happen beside her. She was not the cause of the adjustment. She was, however, the person standing beside the cause of it, and the effect was that 200 faces found Edmund and then found her, and the finding was public in a way the Gala had not been, because this time she was not standing alone. She was standing at his side. She had not been seen at his side before tonight. The Ton had heard about the marriage. Hearing about it and seeing her standing next to the Duke of Westerham in the Carlton House ballroom with the particular quality of a woman who has decided she is not moving were different categories of information, and the assembly absorbed the difference. Langdon was across the room with Miss Pemberton and her father. He had arrived early, which was his habit, and he was positioned where he could see the entrance, which meant he had seen Edmund and Clara arrive. His expression was confident, the smooth parliamentary confidence that had read the Lord Mayor's Charity Gala letter without once looking at her. He had something he intended to use tonight. He believed he had the advantage. Lady Honoria appeared at Clara's left shoulder with the inevitability of a woman who has been waiting in the correct position since the evening began. Langdon looks pleased, Lady Honoria said, in the tone of a woman observing weather she has predicted. People who are pleased before they have done anything useful should always be watched carefully. She adjusted her shawl. I have positioned myself where I can see the whole room. You may proceed. Langdon moved through the assembly with the ease of a man who has rehearsed his lines and found them sufficient. He did not approach Edmund directly. He approached the cluster of men nearest the central floor, Lord Mayor's committee members, White's men, a judge Clara recognized from a charity dinner 2 years before, and he addressed them with the social confidence of someone making an observation that any reasonable person would find obvious. I think many of us have had occasion to wonder, he said, in the carrying parliamentary voice, about the circumstances of the Duke of Westerham's recent marriage. I have filed a formal affidavit with the relevant parties making certain matters of record. I believe the assembly deserves to know them. The room did not stop. It was too large and too noisy for the kind of complete silence the Gala had produced, but the immediate cluster went quiet. The silence spread in rings. It is a matter of public record, Langdon continued, that the engagement between Miss Clara Ashworth and myself was dissolved under circumstances that were not what they appeared. The Duke of Westerham's interest in marrying Miss Ashworth was financial in nature. The Ashworth earldom carries certain property interests that are material to the Westerham estate's northern boundary dispute. I have been asked to characterize the Gala incident as a romantic gesture. I would ask the assembly to consider a more complete reading. He was confident. He had the legal document. He had the rehearsed speech. He had the crowd's attention. Miss Pemberton's father, standing beside Langdon, nodded once. Edmund had not spoken. He stood at Clara's left, with his hands at his sides, and his expression entirely composed, and he did not look at Langdon, and he did not look at the crowd. He looked at Clara. She understood what the look meant. It meant, "This is yours." Clara stepped forward. She did not look at Edmund first. She did not look at Lady Honoria. She stepped forward into the space Langdon's speech had just claimed, and she opened the document case that Mr. Carow had prepared, and she took out the bound pages with the calm of a woman who has spent 7 years learning exactly what to do with a document like this one. The assembly watched her. She stood in the middle of the Carlton House ballroom with 200 people watching, and her husband standing behind her, and the man who had forged a letter and read it aloud in front of the Lord Mayor of London, standing 10 feet away with his parliamentary composure intact, and she held the Sussex estate mortgage records in both hands and looked at Langdon with the same directness she had used at the betrothal dinner when he had answered her father instead of her. This time, he could not answer anyone else. She had the floor. "The Sussex estate belonging to Sir Rupert Langdon," Clara said, in a voice that carried without effort, because she had learned long ago that the voice that carries is the one with nothing to hide, "was mortgaged to Mr. Gerald Hartwin of Threadneedle Street on the 14th of September of last year. The mortgage was registered with the Sussex County Registry on the 15th. She looked at the page. "The Ashworth Langdon engagement was formalized on the 28th of October of last year." She looked up. 6 weeks later, the immediate assembly went quiet. "Sir Rupert's estate was encumbered before the engagement existed," Clara said. "He needed Miss Pemberton's dowry to clear the mortgage. He accepted an approach from Miss Pemberton's father 9 days before my father was approached about a dissolution of my engagement. He had already contracted to the next match. All that remained was to dissolve the current one without paying breach of promise damages." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "The letter Sir Rupert read aloud at the Lord Mayor's charity gala," she said, "was not a response to my conduct. It was the instrument he had already arranged to use. It was prepared before my conduct could have warranted it, because my conduct warranted nothing. He did not leave the engagement because of me. He left the engagement because he had already financially left it, and he needed a public reason that would not cost him in damages." She looked at Langdon. "Sir Rupert accused my husband of marrying me for financial advantage," she said. "The record shows that the man in this room who married for financial advantage, the man who dissolved an engagement he had outgrown by framing it as his future wife's failure, was not Edmund Cavendish. It was Sir Rupert Langdon." The ballroom erupted. Langdon's confident posture did not collapse dramatically. It simply stopped. The certainty went out of his body the way light goes when a lamp is extinguished. All at once, without drama, simply gone. He looked at the mortgage records in Clara's hands. He looked at the dates. He could not argue with dates. He had chosen a legal weapon because the law is specific, and she had answered it with the one thing that beats specificity, the more specific truth. The crowd pressed forward to see the documents. The whispers moved through the room like fire finding a path. Miss Pemberton's face was ashen. Her father had gone very still beside her. Edmund reached into his coat and produced a second document. "The Assembly has heard the documentary record of Sir Rupert Langdon's estate encumbrance," he said. His voice carried in the way that voices carry when the room has already decided to listen. "There is one additional matter." He unfolded the paper. "This is a signed statement from a man named Hartley," Edmund said. "He served as Sir Rupert Langdon's valet from 1821 until last month, when he presented himself to my solicitor. His statement reads as follows." He read it. The statement was 2 pages long. Hartley's handwriting was careful and precise, the handwriting of a man who understood that the document he was signing mattered and had written it accordingly. He had seen Langdon write the letter 3 days before the Lord Mayor's gala. He had recognized the handwriting on the finished copy, which had been sealed with wax and addressed to Sir Rupert himself as if received. He had understood what the letter was intended to do. He had been at the gala in the doorway when the letter was read aloud. He had watched the room stop. He had not been able to stop it. He was stopping it now. Edmund read every word. The Carlton House Assembly received every word. When Edmund finished, There was a silence that was different from the silence of the gala, not the social silence of a room that does not know what to do, but the silence of a room that knows exactly what has happened and is deciding what to do next. Miss Pemberton's father stepped away from Langdon. He did not move toward the door. He moved toward the Lord Mayor's committee cluster, and the movement was public and visible, and every person in the room saw it. "I think," said Mr. Pemberton, addressing no one in particular, and therefore everyone, "that I shall be speaking with my solicitor in the morning." Edmund folded Hartley's statement and returned it to his coat. Then he crossed the 3 feet between himself and Clara and took her hand. In front of 200 witnesses, in the same Carlton House ballroom where Rupert Langdon had just accused him of fraudulent motives. Clara felt his hand take hers. Not the ceremony grip of the special license, not the careful wrist covering of the chapel, but this, a deliberate, public, unhesitating claim that was not legal language and was not contractual arrangement and was not a rescue. It was a choice, stated in front of witnesses, irrevocable. Edmund turned to face the assembly. "This is Clara," he said, "Duchess of Westerham, my wife." He paused. "There is no financial consideration attached to her person that I was not fully aware of before I offered her my arm at the Lord Mayor's gala. There was no misrepresentation made to her father. I spoke directly to him on the subject, and he is in this room and may speak to it himself." Another pause. What Sir Rupert Langdon did to Clara at that gala was a calculated act. She deserved neither it nor the silence that followed it. The documents you have heard tonight establish the calculation. I suggest that if anyone here has a question about her character, they address it to her directly, since she has just demonstrated, rather effectively, what her character is. Clara looked at him. He was not performing. He had never performed. He addressed the assembly with the same matter-of-fact directness he applied to everything, as if the truth were simply the truth, and stating it were not remarkable. The room reorganized itself around Edmund and Clara, the way rooms reorganize around settled facts. Lady Honoria, from the far wall, wore the expression of a woman watching a chess problem she solved 3 weeks ago reach its correct conclusion. Her satisfaction was complete and entirely private and visible to anyone who looked at her, which was most of the room. Rupert Langdon left Carlton House. He did not storm out. He did not make a scene. He simply turned and walked toward the main entrance with the parliamentary smoothness that was his most reliable attribute, and the assembly watched him go, which was its own kind of punishment. To leave under 200 pairs of eyes that have just seen the documentary record of what you are, to walk the length of a room knowing that everyone in it has the information that everyone in it needed to have. The Lord Mayor's committee cluster did not move to let him through. He moved through them. Miss Pemberton had not looked at him since her father stepped away. She was speaking to a woman Clara did not know, with the expression of someone rapidly revising a set of prior assumptions and finding the revision deeply unpleasant. Her father was in the far corner in conversation with 2 men who were listening with the attention of people deciding something. Lord Ashworth was near the east doors. He had been near the east doors since the mortgage records appeared, which was to say, he had been attempting to arrange himself at maximum distance from the most consequential part of the room. He had not spoken. His face was the face of a man who has understood late that the arrangement he made with the solicitor 18 months ago has just been read aloud to the Lord Mayor's annual charity ball. He would not be received in London again. The assembly knew what he had done. The assembly had excellent memories for what had been done in its presence. Lady Honoria arrived beside Clara. "Well," she said, That is what happens when a man mistakes a document for a plan. She looked toward the door through which Langdon had departed. The mortgage records were a nice touch. I did wonder if he had overextended himself financially. People who calculate usually do. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman. Your husband is looking for somewhere to put his hand now that he has released yours. You might save him the uncertainty. Clara looked at Edmund. He was, in fact, looking at his own hand with the faint expression of a man who has just done something in public that he has not done before and is not quite sure what comes next. She took his hand. He did not look surprised. He looked as if this were the correct answer to a question he had been working on for some time. The room settled around them, and the whispers continued, and Rupert Langdon was already through the door and into the London night, and the Carlton House assembly turned away from the door and back toward each other, and the evening proceeded with the relieved energy of a social body that has witnessed something satisfying and can now discuss it at length. Justice had been done. Everyone in the room had seen it. There was nothing further to argue about. The morning after Carlton House was very quiet. Clara came down to breakfast to find Edmund already at the table, which was his habit, and the coffee already poured, which had become his habit more recently. The household noise was the same as it always was at this hour. The kitchen sounds, the footsteps in the corridor, the distant authority of Mr. Carow moving through his morning with his morning efficiency. Everything was exactly as it had been, and yet it was not. She sat across from Edmund and poured a cup of coffee and did not read her correspondence, and did not look at the north wall of the dining room that was visible through the connecting door. She looked at him. He reached into his breast pocket. He placed a small oval object on the table between them. It was a miniature portrait in a gilt frame, the kind that fits in a coat pocket, painted in detail too fine for the size, the way miniatures are when they are made with care. A woman's face, dark hair pinned carefully, gray eyes, the bearing of someone who had decided some time ago that she did not particularly mind being looked at. Clara looked at it for a long moment. She knew whose face it was. She had seen it in the storage room on the canvas that was too large to carry. This was the same face, the same bearing, small enough to hold in one hand. "You said you had no portrait," Edmund said. "This is mine. I should like you to have it." He said it in the same voice he used to address the provision order and the Westerham Hall boundary survey. Matter of fact, direct, without embellishment. The plainness of it was not distance. It was the furthest from distance he knew how to get. Clara picked up the miniature. She held Lady Beatrice in her hands and looked at the face that Edmund had been carrying in his pocket and felt the specific weight of what she was holding, not the physical weight of the frame, which was small, but the weight of what a person carries when they keep a portrait in their pocket for years because they cannot put it on the wall and cannot put it down. She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, as plain as his. The plainness was correct. Some things do not want more language than they require. She set the miniature carefully on the table beside her coffee, where she could look at it while they finished breakfast, and they did not speak again for some time, and the quiet of the morning gathered around them like something earned. She found the garden by accident later that morning. She had not been looking for Edmund. She had been walking the kitchen garden boundary because the walk was useful and the morning was cold enough to require useful movement. And she found him among the late rose canes at the south end of the garden, looking at the last of the season's roses as if they had said something he was still considering. He turned when she came around the corner. He looked at her for a moment, with the expression she had learned to read as him thinking his way toward something. Then he went down on one knee in the late rose garden. The garden was quiet. The winter birds in the hedgerow were the only sound. Edmund on his knee among the bare rose canes and the last cold blooms looked entirely unlike a man performing a gesture, and entirely like a man who has arrived at a decision that cost him something and is acting on it anyway. "When I was 8 years old," he said, "I was in Berkshire learning to ride. I did not know you." He paused. "I have thought, this past week, that if I had known, if someone had told me there was a girl in an Ashworth house room who needed someone to come, I would have come. I would have told you that the still thing you were doing, whatever it was the right thing, and that it would end, and that you could put it down afterward." He stopped. "I cannot go back, but I should like to ask you now properly whether you would like to stay." Clara looked at him from above, from a position she had never been in before in relation to this man, and felt the tilt of the world as the power dynamic she had walked into at the Lord Mayor's charity gala inverted itself quietly, on one knee, in a winter garden, with no witnesses but the birds. "Edmund," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name plainly, without the title, without the social form, just the name, and it settled in the cold air between them. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I would like to stay," she said, "but ask me." "Will you stay?" he said. "Yes," she said. She reached down and took both his hands and helped him up, not because he needed help, but because she wanted to put her hands in his, and he rose, and they stood in the late rose garden at Westerham Hall on a cold morning, with no audience and no documents and no legal instruments, and he put his arms around her and she put her face against his coat, and the stillness was entirely different from the stillness she had practiced since she was 8 years old. This was chosen. 1 year later, the dining room wall was not empty. The portrait of Lady Beatrice had been brought from the storage room on the morning Clara arrived at Westerham Hall as its proper mistress, the morning after the garden, and hung in the space on the north wall where the lighter plaster had shown the shape of the absence. The frame was gilded, and the figure in it was in grey, and she sat with the bearing of a woman who had been waiting to return to her correct position and found it entirely as she expected. Clara sat at the dinner table and looked at the portrait and thought for a moment of the blank wall at Ashworth House, where no portrait of her mother had ever hung, and of the small oval miniature that lived now on her dressing table, and of the particular way a house changes when it stops hiding what it carries. In the chair beside her, Edmund was talking to the small person in the crook of his arm who was not old enough to participate in conversations but had opinions about the evening meal regardless. Their daughter had arrived in August. She had come into the world with the particular efficiency that suggested she had somewhere to be and did not intend to wait for the household to be ready for her. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's expression of careful attention. Lady Honoria had visited in September and had said, upon being presented with the infant, that she had exactly the look of a woman who would cause considerable difficulty for 30 years and then be impossible to imagine the family without. She had then held her for 45 minutes without returning her. The accounting was settled. Rupert Langdon's valet, whose signed confession had been read aloud to the Carlton House Assembly, had also authorized its circulation to White's and Brooks's, where it was received with the particular satisfaction of clubs that had been watching Langdon's social credit with some skepticism. The breach of promise suit brought by Miss Pemberton's father was resolved in the Pemberton family's favor in the spring. The Sussex estate was sold to clear the judgment. Langdon had left for Boulogne before the ink on the sale was dry and had not returned. Lord Ashworth had not been received in London again. This was accomplished without drama. It was simply a matter of Lady Honoria and Edmund's solicitor ensuring that the relevant doors were closed at the relevant times, and Lord Ashworth did not have the social resources to open them independently. He spent the winter at his Gloucestershire property. He had not written to Clara. She had not written to him. The Ashworth Ladies' Foundation had opened its first offices on a quiet street in Holborn in October, staffed by 2 lawyers and a woman named Mrs. Vickers, who had spent 20 years managing the practical difficulties of women who had been publicly humiliated by broken engagements and had developed a systematic and rather effective approach to the problem. The foundation did not advertise. It did not need to. Word found its way to the women who needed it the way useful things do. Clara looked at Lady Beatrice's portrait on the wall. She thought about what it meant to live in a house that had stopped hiding what it carried. She thought about the Westerham Hall library and the ledger and the late-night lamp. She thought about the chapel candles and the cold stone and the weight of Edmund's hands over her wrists. She thought about a garden in winter and a knee on the cold ground and the word yes said in 2 voices at the same time. She thought about sitting still. If this story gave you something today, if you felt Clara's journey, if Edmund earned your trust, then this channel is your home. Subscribe, ring the bell, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Rate this story 1 to 10. I read every single comment, and if someone needs this kind of story today, send it to them. She had been still at the Lord Mayor's Gala because she had learned, before she understood what she was learning, that stillness was the only shelter she had. She had been still in Edmund's carriage, and in Lady Honoria's drawing room, and in the Westerham chapel, and in the Carlton House ballroom, and in a winter garden where a man went down on one knee among the late roses. She was still now. But the stillness was not endurance. It had not been endurance for some time. It was simply the way a woman sits when she is exactly where she chose to be, in a house she has made her own, beside the person who asked her to stay.